welcome back after this first short break. We remain, of course, with the topic of cities. However, we enter a totally different format. We are going to have a duel, not a brutal, sanguine one, but still, hopefully, I'm sure, a very interesting and inspiring one. With two panelists, one remote and one present. I'm going to briefly introduce first the remote panelist. It is Naveen Joshi, who is a columnist and founder and CEO of Alerine, a private firm which develops engineering and technology solutions with the objective to improve customers' experiences. Hi, Naveen, welcome. He works a lot in the field of artificial intelligence, big data, blockchain, and some other acronyms I must confess I didn't understand, but I trust it is important and good. And we will have, as a second duelist, Haris Piplas. Please, Haris, you can already come here. Haris Piplas is an author and collaborator of several urban landscape and architectural projects in cities and urban areas in Europe, Africa, and Asia. He has a master in urban design and a PhD from ETH, the Technical High School in Zurich. So these are the two profiles of our duelists, two rather different profiles, two different positions, but actually you will see not necessarily in the way you would expect them to be. But before we start with the duel, let's also involve you as members of the audience, both in presence and virtually. We have prepared a poll, and in order to fill in this poll, you need a smartphone, something no one of us is living without in our days, because otherwise, well, things would be more complex. Anyway, you see the QR code. You should enter this code. If it's not working, you could also enter the number, which is featured besides the code, and then you will see two statements, and you can move the button along the spectrum offered if you agree or if you disagree or something in between. And you see the two statements. One reads, "Smart cities promote inclusion through efficiency and innovation." This is a positive statement. And the other one reads, "Smart cities deepen cleavages through control and gentrification." And we see it's actually it's still moving, so we wait a little bit more. So you see, this is not a secret poll, you know, as we would run them in serious democracy, where you vote without knowing what will be the result in terms of intermediary results. We wait a few more seconds. But anyway, I think there will not be many more significant changes. So the public, you are the public, the virtual one included, is split, which is perfect, I think, to start the duel. And Haris, the first word comes to you.
Thank you very much. I hope everybody can hear me in the room and also online. I also prepared some images, maybe to illustrate some of the statements that I want to share with you. And I'm looking forward to also discuss with you. But also I would like to say that I really appreciate this personal histories and emotions that were communicated in the last panel, and of how you understand the city, and as refugees and migrants, and myself also as spending the majority of my life in two cities that have a dynamic history like Sarajevo and Berlin. I understand you and I feel with you, and I hope to also bring some inputs here that could bring some, maybe not answers, but maybe some foods for discussion. So what is a smart city? when Mr. Götzl asked me to take this in favor position, I asked myself, okay, what is a smart city? We have all different understandings what it is, and I think we need to demystify it. So I here will ask 5 questions to myself, to you. If this is a smart city, then but if we see the media footage, very often you hear about the smart city as this kind of medium that's going to destroy democracy. The smart city is not social enough. There is so much technology, so we all know the anecdote that technology is the solution, but what was the question? So we hear about bad footage about what a smart city is. And then if you look into different images on the internet, so you see all this futuristic vision of ICT, parks, glass towers, bullet trains, all this kind of hyper technology, this, if you want, technocratic glamour, and in a homogenized, uniform city. So is this a smart city? But very often we hear that we have to put the people first, right? And in this sense, there is a statement that talks about people and talks about democratic ecologies, cities as democratic ecologies, and that goes beyond only participation, but it goes in the direction of social innovation. And of course, we all know about these dramatic images that the cities are consuming 75% of electricity, creating 80% of greenhouse gases, take 2 or 3 or 4% of the surface of the earth, but we still come only up with technology or some simple solutions to these radical problems. So in this sense, the question here is, if all these radical problems we have in our cities, how can this teach us, how we can extract knowledge from the city in order to intervene in the city? So here, these 5 points are, if smart cities are inclusive, or should they be inclusive? And we know these images, this is from Sao Paulo, but it's not only about the global south and different other parts of the world. The COVID crisis brought some social polarization also to Europe, to our societies. So this is not a photo montage. This is an image in Paraisópolis that shows about this radical polarization, spatial polarization in our cities. And of course, we have these kind of new movement that pedestrianize cities. So we have Vienna, for example. We have this kind of new inclusive places. And, of course, if cities like Paris or cities like New York can make it, and in this sense, you see the Broadway here, which, reclaimed 45,000 square meters of highly intensive traffic space and gave it back to citizens. And in this sense, the city government saw itself as a moderator of these processes and not as someone who defines what the city should be. And the second point is the smart cities are collaborative, or should they be collaborative? How to bring different stakeholders, we mentioned them, community, industry, academia, etc., and deploy innovation into our cities. And here's an image of some of these city labs where, of course, it is a long-term process to bring consensus, because building cities is a consensus act, if you want, creating a consensus. And, we have to integrate stakeholders. But, of course, this is difficult, and we have to demystify the roles of the stakeholders, of the mayor, of the engineers, of citizen representatives. And that's something that we attempt to do in these, urban simulations, where we use these digital and analog ways of simulating this urban development process to prevent conflicts and to maybe predict them in order so they don't happen in reality. So we can use technology to help us to build a better analog society. Are smart cities sustainable? And we all also know about these graphics where, yes, of course, we all know about what a green infrastructure, what benefit does it bring, biodiversity, energy, food, etc. So we already discussed it just before. And yes, we can plan cities as green corridors, but in this sense, we have to, break it down to real projects, to go beyond these infographics and look into thinking of here, in this sense, mobility or traditional mobility, and also kind of overlap it with other functions like green, recreational, etc. Fourth point is smart cities should be active. And this is an image from Zurich, city where I lived for the last 10 years, where, this is graffiti, the no architects. So we have to be careful as architects and urbanists, in our case, not to destroy social and economic networks in cities. And in this sense, we have to also consider these less attractive non-places or anti-places and try to activate and give them back to the community. Like here, you can see here some of these images, and place make in a way. And the last point, and somebody mentioned, how is it to be an urban planner in the 21st century? It's difficult, of course, because we still have these static, fixed master plans from the past that tried to predict what a city should be in the next 50 years. Of course, this is not possible. We have to think of flexible master plans, of scenarios to overlap functions, not to divide work from recreation, from residential. And I think, all these best practices, they do not have to be expensive. So here, this is a reality in many Latin American cities, just to open up hardcore infrastructure to the citizens and sort of create, new places to meet, new places to innovate, new places to co-create. So, the smart city does not have to be expensive. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention and happy to hear your feedback.
Thank you very much, Harris, and the feedback will come from Naveen. Naveen, it's all yours.
Well, thank you, Roland, and thanks for your insights, Harris. It's quite enlightening to know that. So, see, this is how I see it. There is something called smart city, and then something called vision for smart cities. So I will try to address the point what Dr. Harris said right here. Do we have the smart cities which are inclusive? I hope everyone can hear me out properly.
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
Okay. So when we say inclusive, whom are you including here? So like whenever we think of the smart cities, we think about like those fancy services like bullet trains, smart parking, smart streets, smart lighting and all. But are we including the homeless? Are we including those senior citizens who need more medical care than the faster streets? Or when we think about the city facility like smart parking, so what do we call a smart city? Which had the better parking infrastructure or which had less need of the parking at all? Like we are what should we call a smart city? Which can handle more vehicle or which demands less vehicle? So in the light of the thoughts, when we go further ahead, because I have been working in the smart city domain in the last 10 years and have been exposed to some of the darker side. And since it uses the infrastructure, what we call a connected infrastructure, so that is changing very, very fast, and it certainly changed the sustainability of the smart city, like all those connected devices which used to be in the market for 5 years, around 5 years back, like sensors and all those, like cameras. So those things are already obsoleted. Like in this futuristic vision, we cannot have to have an analog sensor which has no encryption at all. And then lack of the standardization in technology, which is making the technology used in the IoT, in the smart cities such as IoT, quite vulnerable for the data security. And the third concerning region, what I see here is that a biasness. And when I say the biasness is towards, it's mostly gender and the racial too. In most of the languages, we do not have a different word for a he or she. But in English, this is how we train our machine learning models, or we make the smart cities to handle the more and more people. So it is assumed that most of the smart city users are going to be the male, or so in my opinion, the smart city solutions and the technology needs to be more gender sensitive, more racial sensitive, so that it is not working for the person who has designed it, but for each and everyone who is going to be in the city, including the homeless, including the migrants, including everyone, and who are going to be in the city in the next 10 years too. So coming back to the primary question, how inclusive the smart city is? Like, are we going to include the children who are not yet born? Are we going to include the senior citizens who are not paying the taxes anymore, who have paid in the past? Or are we going to include those more and more vehicles which are basically going to damage the ecosystem or the greenery of the city? So in my opinion, we need to have a vision for the smart city to be developed before we get into the smart city domain. Like I said, what do we call a smart city? A city which can handle more vehicle, or city which does not need a vehicle at all. So this is my counter argument. Laurent, over to you.
Thank you very much, Naveen. Harris?
Very good point. Thanks a lot. And I can talk from my experience that if you saw the slide where I showed this 20th century way of planning cities, where we have these static master plans, where we have maybe mostly males planning them for males, where we have less flexibility than we need. And I have to say, these, even though it's easy to say this is a thing from the past, it's not. So in most cities that I worked in, this, zoning, monofunctional, static way of planning is still the reality. So we have the technology, we have innovation in architecture and urbanism, but it's not still did not arrive in the policy. And these city labs and these, let's say, stakeholder engagement events, usually they're not part of a formal urban planning process. So if we want to do them, we have to find other ways of financing it, other ways of doing it. There's a lot of activism, a lot of free work, a lot of sort of pain, a lot of emotions that we put inside, because not even in Switzerland, this way of co-creating a city, gathering stakeholders, listening to them, and synthesizing their fears, their needs, their visions, and being this mostly the moderator, the facilitator, rather than this kind of architect who knows everything, that's a great challenge, because in every city we work, and of course, it's a difficult question that you can say, yes, I know only my home village, and wherever I go, I don't feel secure enough to deal with these complexities of the place. But we live in a global planet, if we don't or want it or not, and we always work with local partners who have trust, legitimacy, who know the place, and it takes still many years to build up, partnership, trust, etc. And in this sense, it's always a kind of slalom, if you want, or an innovation path to figure out how to really do it in this inclusive and collaborative way, because it's just not, sometimes we break the law if we do that, because it's just not, it's not this way of participation like many Central European, countries have, which is, you're in favor or against. And this is a way of participation or collaboration that I don't believe it's not collaborative, inclusive enough, where you present a finished master plan or building a park and then give it to it being decided. And very often you have this polarization. So you have many in favor, you have different interests, you have vested interests, you have biases. And what in these city labs, at least, it can reduce the risk. It can increase communication, collaboration. It's not this, happy moments of kumbaya and everybody singing. Those are very intensive sessions. So there's a lot of tears and conflict, etc. But in this sense, where we try to use technology very, very little, very punctually, that help us also to not to predict what it's going to be, but just gives different scenarios to visualize what this future transformation of a place should be. So in this sense, just to demystify, because we realize that many of these conflicts, and we, you have to invite, obviously these usual suspects, the community groups, etc., vulnerable groups. That you talked about the homeless, etc. But what is this future city? And there's a lot of conflict because the communication didn't work. So you say smart and somebody else says smart, and then they understand a different thing, and fights is starting and the project is stopped. So if you visualize it, and I think this is maybe the skill that architects should use more confidentially, but as synthesizers, and to show what is possible, and then to give it back to to the community, to the stakeholders to decide on it.
Thank you. Harris? Naveen, you still have to disagree, yeah, that's part of the setting.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. Even though we are supposed to be disagreeing with each other, but Dr. Harris is actually echoing my heart. But he's talking about some challenges, what I get to see every now and then. Like he talks about the sustainability and the basic infrastructure, which starts from the connectivity and the communication, which is a key part of the future. But in this context, when he talked about the inclusion of the different stakeholders, so the biggest problem what I see here is the most of the R&D or most of the the work being done towards the smart city is by the private players, but not by the government entities. In my opinion, this should be the other way around. Like the government or the the human factor should come forward with the need, and we should decide. I mean, they should decide at some point like how smart the smart is, or how far we are going to go with that, or are we talking about the smart cities only, or maybe one step further? Why not we are talking about the intelligent cities? Why just smart city? Why not intelligent? Why you have to feed the data to the city to make it work? Why it cannot pick the data on its own? Like I said, we have the different community of the citizen group, which has the different priorities. For example, the senior citizen, which are 60-year-old. So when you think of a hospital that needs to have a different super specialty, if your citizenship, I mean the citizen ratio is higher in terms of a number. Like if you have 40% of population, which is beyond 60%, 60 years of age, so how your hospital should be equipped? But this is purely a human factor. I don't, like smart city can make a place or the connectivity and everything for a hospital. But what about, like what kind of hospital? How smart the hospital is? Or how equipped it is for your citizens? So unless we add those, because this is very much possible if you go for the technology side of it, it is very much possible. Like there is one sort of technology, this tracker can keep an eye on your city population, how old people are growing, what do they do, how much they are filing the taxes, and everything. The smart city can keep a record for that. But is it equipped to serve them back? So when we talk about the G2C services, we talk about government to citizen. Why don't we go for the government to clientele? Why? Because those citizens are actually the client of the government. They are paying taxes. They are sorry, they are making the infrastructure work. They are making everything work in the town by their own taxes. So coming back to this question, and even though we are supposed to be on the opposite side, I am echoing the word Dr. Harris has said here. Like we have to have some sort of the vision in plan. So as I said in my previous statement, before we get into the smart city, are we already good enough into the vision of smart city? Have we already visualized that what we would be needing 10 years down the line? Or who are the decision makers, who are the stakeholders? Are they same or not? And then the actual actors, the industry which is investing their funds for the R&D or making those devices. Like if you go to the internet, you see many fancy devices, like you can walk on water now, you can fly from your 10th floor of building and jump to the ground, and all those kind of devices already in place. But who is investing behind it? So those are the cool devices. They sound very cool, but how useful are they, and for whom, and for what citizen group we are targeting here? So yes, I did talk about homeless. I did talk about the old cities, because in my smart city initiatives or wherever I have been involved, I can see that it has been left because they are not going to be the next contributing factor, because they won't be there after 10 to 15 years. Like if the people who are 70 or 75-year-old, so smart cities are not planning for them. And as I said earlier, like this, the gender discrimination, like is this inclusive or not? So I can talk about many voice commands, like due to the pandemic, the biggest risk came for to us through the kiosk, a public kiosk. Now no one wants to touch the kiosk because we don't know who else had touched it before. So now people are going for a touchless kiosk. And when you go to a touchless kiosk, and it has to be gender sensitive. It should be like when you can talk to the kiosk, you can speak to a kiosk like an individual, like a robot. So it should be treating you based on your age group, based on your accessibility, your ability. Like, if you are physically challenged, sometimes you need a hearing aid, sometimes you need some glasses to look at the screen and stuff like that. So are we equipped to include those already? And with this question, I put it back to Laurent and Dr. Harris.
Thank you very much, Naveen. I'm really happy you are remote and not here, because otherwise probably you would have hugged each other. And this would be, the catastrophe for a duel.
We disagree that we have to disagree.
No. I'm not disappointed at all. I just tried to make the best out of the situation that we are split between different continents. We already reached the end of the time, and you both had twice the opportunity to talk. So to wrap up in one sentence, I think we have seen that there are different perspectives on smart cities still, particularly if depending on the level of formality you are looking at in terms of processes regarding what really counts in terms of power and influence in planning and moving forward such entities. Whereas on the other side, of course, you can design all kinds of inclusion-oriented processes which may or may not have an impact, but which will not be on the same level. And this is the level where we might and probably should think further in terms of the relevance of technology and different optimizations in terms of efficiency versus inclusivity also of marginalized part of this city. So I think this was as long as one sentence could be. And with this, I should definitely stop. Naveen, many thanks for having been with us for this duel. I hope we will be in touch at some other occasions. Thank you. And Harris, we will stay in touch at least for the rest of the day.